I'd like to share some information that I've picked up upon and started to learn about our own Canadian deficit. I know that there are a lot of people that they don't understand the information. It can be very overwhelming to try to understand what had taken place and what's going on and what had taken place in the past. And when you talk to experts, they only refer to the now of what's going on with the numbers. They never ask why or what happened in the past or what it is that led us to this direction. There are numerous people who must see that we live in a deficit world because we're constantly being berated and bombarded with these people who become politicians, and they always come up with a new means, a new way to take your money and punish you. And they say it's for the punishment aspect of you not listening and doing, but in reality you had a way that worked sufficiently in the past, there was no problem, people worked around the problem, commerce never became an issue. And suddenly they come in and they say, well, we'll solve it, we'll just start taking everybody's money away to make them behave. And of course some people can't. We're human, we make mistakes, we try to do the best. And yes, there are some people, the aggravated ones, but they're a small, minute amount of people. I believe we are consistently bombarded with being punished by the few, when the majority of us always try to do the right, available thing, you know? When I started to inform people at Walmart and go up to them in person and tell them that these machines that they're stopping for, that go beep, 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 that they don't have any legal law. There is no rights for them to make you stop. A lot of the time, people's eyes opened up. Now, what I was giving them was not a means or a way to steal, but to let them know that they had a choice. That when you have 300 items in there from our Christmas time, and their machines that seem to be not perfect go off for whatever particular reason because their employee forgot to scan an item, demagnetize it like they're supposed to do. You go through beep, beep, beep. The greeters or whatever who they have at the door representing, who have no legal rights or no grounds, you instantly give up your rights because you don't know this choice. And you open up and you're going through a list while people are going by. It's kind of embarrassing, but you know you're not a thief. You know you have nothing to prove and nothing to hide. You've done nothing wrong. And it is a choice, those machines that go off and beep, beep, beep. And when I started to tell, I noticed that there has been a change, a huge change. I had people come up to me on both sides and say, you know, like, why would you want people to know or to do that, da-da-da-da-da. And I do believe we should have a choice. It is that simple. It's not fair that the people who only know this information are the criminals anyway, and that we as a good person and individual who are told time and time again that time is money, expect us to just drop our time for the convenience of a store like Walmart that came in and destroyed store after store. You know, how many Canadian stores had to up and close because of them? And you're ready to give your loyalty over to this store? It's kind of mind-boggling, you know. It's kind of frustrating too, but there is a truth, you know. And with our economy, how frustrating is that people don't even realize the difference between I owe and I own. Prior to 1970, you look at our money. Here, I'll show you. You see, our money, which is represented prior to 1970, 1968 is the only bill I can find. There is no bills that were printed in 1969. There were coins, apparently. And 1968, isn't that interesting, too, that leap? But in 1968, it says, pay to the bearer upon demand. Does it not? Yes, it does. But here we look at 1970 and nobody seemed to notice the change. Where now it states, as you can see, legal tender, as you can see. So, what does that represent? What does that mean? Well, prior to 1970, the Bank of Canada, we had a small deficit. I think at that time it was around 14 billion. It went from 4 billion to 14 billion from the 1940s. Okay, let me go back to the 1800s. In the 1860s, we had about $1 billion deficit. My understanding is prior to 1970s, the Bank of Canada used to spend the money into existence. And the deficit was very low prior to that. And it was after that time period, that the Bank of Canada no longer did it create money for the people. It borrowed the money into existence from the private banks. So our own country, the Bank of Canada, that creates and prints our own money, still to even today, goes to the federal to borrow the money from the private bankers. This deficit is not a deficit based on Canada. This is a deficit based on the private banks that we now owe. And they slipped it through, and it doesn't seem like a lot of people know or notice. I found an article, a flashback in 1970, where the gentleman who's going over it is stating, and he's working on economic thinking. And to me, I feel like I'm almost reading in between the lines. So I found this article, a gentleman who's talking about an article from 1970. And they were debating over inflation in Canada. And he would state what the article said, and then he would state his own personal aspects. So as I went through, I found this certain particular statement that caught my eye. In the very bottom of the statement, where he had found the article regarding the 1970s, about and written in the 1970s, it stated, "We believe the recent deep recessions provides Canadian policymakers with more scope to achieve low inflation and low unemployment simultaneously." This is the part that caught my eye. "But have the central bank and other policymakers and also recognize that the structure of the economy has changed." This gentleman went on to about, "Now if the long-run Phillips curve has indeed shifted to the left of the recent deep recession, blah blah," but I believe that he's stuck in the moment of economy and looking at the aspects and not asking the question, are you sure you know what particular changes that went through the structure of the economy that they're speaking about, that the central bank is now referring to the policymakers and the structure of the economy change, not the Bank of Canada? Like, the Bank of Canada has all these aspects. Thus, the Canadians have new taxes and huge spending cuts of federal programs to cure the fiscal deficit to some extent up to the Bank of Canada. And he expected for sure a statement that they would normally always say, and they said something completely out of character, which caught his attention. Now, his logic is the economy, because that's where he's based. My logic is the fact that I seen in the 1968s how we changed lawfully, legally, on our money, contractual money, because that's what it is not? It's a contract basis, that piece of paper, that it's worth this value when I go to the store and spend it, the face on it of its value by our debt society. So here we are jumping from 1970 up to about 1990, say 1994, 3 or 4 I guess, that we tipped off at 583 billion. We went from approximately, I believe is around 14 billion, okay, from 1 billion to 4 billion, which happened because of the wars. From 4 billion, from the 1940s, 4 billion, to the 1970s, it went up 14 billion. So this small little slice smidgen, okay? And at that point, when we decided to go legal tender-wise and central bank ourselves, instead of ourselves owning the money, the citizens of Canada owning the Bank of Canada, it now changed into the hands of the private bankers. The central bank that now runs our country, like it did so many other countries, is now run by the hands of the private bankers. And we went from owning to I owe. We went from our country creating the money and spending it into existence, creating the railroads, the infrastructures, the roads, the highways, everything that was created on the backs of the Canadians was done by us creating our money and our government spending it into existence so that your companies would flourish and be able to do all of this across with very minimal, low, almost non-existent interest. And suddenly, we went to this compounded, insane, like, interest based on a private bank borrowing incident, and it was done sneakily. And I'm not even sure if a lot of the people understood what was taking place right before their very eyes. So, you know, here we are 40 years later. Now, there was a dip. 1990s we dropped $100 billion in that time. But we also lost a lot of things. Okay, they cut on healthcare. They closed hospitals right across Alberta. I remember multiples just in the city of Edmonton, you know, old people having to travel long distances, ambulances having to waste more time and gas. It's just insane. They can't even justify a lot of these closures. There was nothing wrong with the buildings and whatnot. In some instances, yes, there was one I can agree with, you know, because it's full of asbestos. And it's a ward of the cancer patients. What patients, you might ask? Well, children, of course. Yes, Canadians had a building, humongous structure, looks like about 10 stories tall, full of asbestos. Ironically, here they are curing these children of cancer with their chemotherapies and radiations and whatnot in an asbestos-filled building. No, it's you just, you don't know what to say. You're stunned by the stupidness of, you know. And that's a whole other story about Health Canada and they backing the fact that asbestos at one time, they told us, had no ill effects, you know. What do we know now? Again, that's another story. We can go on. But as it goes on for about our understanding of money, you know, I am so sorry for us Canadians that we've been duped, you know, and that we live in this existence, and it's going to get worse, you know. And I don't know if we'll ever change it, because a lot of the people have their heads stuck in the fucking sand like an ostrich. They just don't care. They look away. They're too busy with their lives. And the only time that they care is when life around them or the government steps on them. And things are very well and still good in Canada. It's a young country, but there is huge changes I've seen, even in the time I've been here. The huge cuts on policies. The money that was just literally handed to people to make the whole of Canada grow. I mean, how did they get everybody up in Fort McMurray? Well, at one time, you could go and live up in Fort McMurray, and they would give you an isolation pay, being there was only one road to get way the hell to nowhere land. And the government would kick you back a couple $1,000 just living there, you know? All of that was gone. And I can understand that they could never keep up with that, because we live in a deficit society. There is no reward system. You will never get rewarded for doing what is good and proper and kind and caring and decent and whatnot for a short term and duration, yeah, to the people around you. But how can you when you live in a debt society, when they keep taking and taking and taking? And why? Because we owe. Motherfucking off to work we go. God bless each and every one of you, and all those your heart touches.